Let the students to join in between. Okay. So we'll start the session. Let the students to join. So we'll start with lower GI bleeding. We have already discussed about upper GI bleeding. So what are the lower GI bleeding conditions we'll be discussing? Besides that, we'll be learning about pancreatitis, hepatic failure, etc. So now my PPT is visible to you all. Is my PPT visible to all?
Ma'am.
Okay. So, what is lower GI bleeding? Lower GI gastrointestinal bleeding encompasses a wide spectrum of symptoms ranging from trivial hematochezia to massive hemorrhage with trivial means very little. Hematochezia means some the fresh and fresh blood when it comes out from the colon, or it comes out with the it dribbles from the rectum, or it comes out with the stool. So acute lower GI bleeding is defined as bleeding that is of recent duration, originates beyond the ligament of threads, and results in instability of vital signs, and is associated with signs of anemia with or without need for blood transfusion. So, what are the causes for lower GI tract bleeding? One can be coagulopathy, and if there is colitis. So, colitis can be ischemic colitis, ulcerative colitis, infectious colitis, which is very commonly caused by microorganism E. coli, Shigella, Salmonella, and Campylobacter jejuni. Then, in case of hemorrhoids, also there will be trickling of small and fresh blood from the colon. So, what are the causes of LGIV? That is angiodysplasia can be there, or neoplasm, then any diverticular diseases, then anal fissure is the common cause, then Crohn's disease, uh, then mesenteric ischemia, and colonic polyps. Angiodysplasia, all of you know, that is a bleeding disorder which occurs when the blood vessels in the GI tract stretches or dilates beyond the normal size, then bleeding occurs. So in that case, lower gastrointestinal bleeding will be there, and other than everything, Crohn's disease, all of you know, Crohn's disease is a chronic inflammatory bowel disease which causes inflammation of the digestive tract. In those conditions, also there will be bleeding, internal bleeding. So, what are the signs symptoms of LGIV? First of all, blood for rectum can be hematochezia, that means fresh red blood you can see, and melena. Melena is the occult blood. You can see occult blood that is brownish in color, not fresh look like. Then abdominal cramp will be there, dehydration may be there, fever in case of any infection, infectious colitis, there will be fever. So, type of LGIV that is massive can be moderate and can occur type. Uh, in case of massive, when age is more than 65 years and plus any sort of comorbidity is there, medical problem, then hematochezia is there and SBB is equal to 90, and then HR, yeah, pulse rate or heart rate will be more than 100. Low urine output, when it is there will be low urine output. Usually, when less than 20, 30 ml per hour, we usually call low urine output, and hemoglobin is 6. Then we'll tell the condition is massive one. Then moderate, any age, hematochezia or melena will be the sign symptoms. Then there will be long-term disease, any sort of long-term disease associated with the condition. Then moderate amount or acute or chronic bleeding will be there. We'll say moderate condition. Then occult type, when any age and a patient with hypochromic microcytic anemia, any history of neoplasm or any congenital malformation. So, what are the diagnostic studies of LGIV? Uh, First of all, colonoscopy you have to do, then radionuclide scans, angiography, complete blood cell count, serum electrolyte levels, CBC you have to do for knowing the hemoglobin and the RBC count, etc. Then coagulation profile, including activated partial thromboplastin time, and then prothrombin time, manual platelet count, and bleeding time. Then helical CT scanning of the abdomen and the pelvis can be used when a routine workup fails to determine the cause of active GI bleeding. So, what are the management of LGIV? This is a general management. We are talking about all general disorders. What is happening? If it occurs with all those sign symptoms, we will go for this management. First of all, you have to start with the resuscitation and initial assessment. Localization of the bleeding site, you have to identify through the diagnostic procedure where the bleeding actually occurs. Then therapeutic intervention to stop the bleeding at the site. What are the common surgery for LGIV? Then you can go for send the patient for hemicolectomy, colectomy, abdominoperineal resection. It depends upon the disease condition. Then treatment for different LGIV. In case of diverticular bleeding, colonoscopy with bipolar probe coagulation, epinephrine injection or metallic clips will be given. And then recurrent bleeding, resection of the affected bowel segment, angiodysplasia, thermal therapy, that is electrocoagulation, organ plasma coagulation. Then in patients in whom the bleeding site cannot be determined, in those cases vasoconstrictive agents such as vasopressin and that is pitressin can be used. If vasopressin is unsuccessful or contraindicated, a super selective embolization is useful. So, what is your nursing management for LGIV? History taking, duration of the disease condition you have to assess, episodes of hematomesis, quantity, color you have to check, what kind of what type of, then if it is coffee ground appearance. Sir, namaskar. ମୁଁ ଗ୍ରୀନୁ ନେଇପାରିବ ଦୁଇ ଜଣ ହଁ ହଁ ଦେଖିକି ସାର୍ କେଉଁଠି ରିସର୍ଚ୍ଚଟା ଅଛି ମୁଁ କହିବି ଆପଣଙ୍କୁ ମୁଁ ଲେଖୁଛି ସାର୍ ସେଇଟା ମେଲ୍ରେ ଲେଖିଦେବି ଦେଖିକି ସିଲାବସ୍ଟା ହଁ So we'll go for seeing the color of the vomited blood. Then blood in stools, that is maroon colored stools, can be present in acute severe upper GI bleeding. History of jaundice if there is a cirrhosis. History of epigastric pain, peptic ulcer, esophagitis, erosive gastritis, weight loss in case of carcinoma stomach. So physical assessment, general examination and systemic examinations. Vitals, check for the vitals, pulse, PP. You may get 3D pulse because the patient may go to shock condition for internal bleeding, and BP, orthostatic hypotension will be there. And always see for the pictures of shock, that is cold, calm skin or cold extremities, tachycardia, hypotension, chest pain, confusion, delirium, oliguria, etc. Skin changes will be there in case of cirrhosis, palmar erythema, spider navy, then bleeding disorders like purpura, ecchymosis, coagulation disorders, hemarthrosis, muscle hematoma. Physical examination, signs of dehydration will be there. Dry mucosa, sunken eyes, skin turgors, reduced. So you have to check always signs of dehydration. Signs of a tumor may be present, nodular, liver, abdominal mass, lymphadenopathy, and etc. Diarrhea, there will be fresh blood, occult blood, bloody, diarrhea, respiratory, CBS, CNS combination. CNS, you have to check for any comorbid diseases. Nursing care in acute phase of LGIB, assess for features of shock, start intravenous fluid replacement, give injection adrenaline, check hemoglobin and start transfusion as soon as possible, send blood for electrolytes, start electrolyte correction as soon as possible, start injection noradrenaline to maintain BP, maintain nutrition by nasogastric or parenteral nutrition, nasogastric suction if required. Then nursing care in preoperative phase, give preoperative teaching, assess anxiety and provide mental support, explain different treatment modalities and help to choose the best one, explain need of keep in NPM, preoperative medications are given. So nursing diagnosis will be fluid electrolyte imbalance related to blood loss, possibly evidenced by hematemesis, melena, dehydration. So first of all, the interventions for this will, you will maintain the electrolyte balance in the body. That is the nursing goal. Nursing intervention will be start correcting. Assess the vital signs. Then administer the fluid. First of all, RL you have to immediately administer. Then go for administering other fluid. Check for the blood expander or blood transfusion if it is needed. So blood expanders can be given also. So hypovolemic hemorrhagic shock, next diagnosis related to severe blood loss, possibly evidenced by low blood pressure, pallor. Here you have to give. See the patient's whether the patient is restless or not. Then you have to administer blood immediately and send the samples for blood grouping and arrest typing. Then administer the transfuse the blood and administer oxygen. Then third diagnosis is pain abdomen related to gastrointestinal tract, mucous trauma or ulcer, possibly evidenced by verbalization, facial expression. So you have to give comfortable position to the patient, then uh, inform to the doctor. These are the intervention you will check, and any pain management non-pharmacological methods like uh, you have to tell to the patient to give any support to the abdomen where the pain occurs. So any hot and cold therapy, usually cold therapy, you can give so that the pain abdomen may be reduced. But give the medications as per the doctor's order. Then active intolerance related to weakness and imbalance between oxygen supply demand and low hemoglobin, possibly evidenced by tachypnea and shortness of breathing activity. So you have to uh, give the administer the oxygen, as I said ki you have to check the saturation and everything. Go for administering oxygen. Then next diagnosis is ineffective management of therapeutic regimen related to lack of knowledge about appropriate nutrition and medication regimen, possibly evidenced by frequent verbalization. So you have to explore the knowledge of the patient. Uh, ask for the, assess the previous knowledge the patient had, and explain about the medication regimen, and the seek support of the patient and family members. Then explain about the nutrition the patient has to take in this condition. Then imbalanced nutritional status less than the body requirements related to inadequate nutritional intake and anorexia, dietary restriction possibly evidenced by anorexia, fatigue, weakness, etc. So you have to give the fluid and till the bleeding subsides, and then you give more of fiber diet which will facilitate I mean uh, the bowel, and there will be no constipation. Then give cold milk, etc., whatever it is required as per the condition improves. Next, ineffective tissue perfusion related to poor oxygenation, possibly evidenced by oxygen saturation level and capillary refill. So always check for the capillary refill, assess the capillary refill and saturation ABG analysis you will do. Then you have to administer the oxygen. Next, you will go for pancreatitis. So you know pancreas, how it looks. So this is a pictorial presentation of healthy pancreas and inflamed pancreas. Pancreas is elongated and tapered organ and a pale gray gland weighing about 60 grams and about 12 to 15 centimeter long. It is situated in the epigastric and left hypochondriac regions of the abdominal cavity. Pancreatitis is a serious disorder. It's a condition characterized by inflammation of the pancreas. Pancreatitis is commonly described as autodigestion of the pancreas. It is believed that the pancreatic duct becomes temporarily obstructed, accompanied by hypersecretion of the exocrine enzymes of the pancreas. These enzymes enter the bile duct where they are activated and together with the bile pack up into the pancreatic duct, causing pancreatitis. So, pancreatitis is the inflammation of pancreas. It is commonly described as autodigestion of the pancreas. Classification: it can be mild acute pancreatitis, severe acute pancreatitis, and chronic pancreatitis. Mild acute pancreatitis, it is an acute inflammatory process of the pancreas. The degree of inflammation varies from mild edema to severe hemorrhagic necrosis. Severe acute pancreatitis, termed as necrotizing and hemorrhagic pancreatitis. In these, the tissue becomes necrotic and damage extend to retroperitoneal tissues. Chronic pancreatitis, it occurs after the acute pancreatitis. It is an inflammatory condition or a disorder characterized by progressive anatomic and functional dysfunction of the pancreas. The inflammation of the pancreas doesn't heal in this condition and leads to permanent damage. So, mostly alcoholism, gallstone, and abdominal injury leads to acute pancreatitis. pancreas become swollen and releases digestive juice into the bloodstream. Then this repetitive acute pancreatitis can lead to chronic pancreatitis, which is irreversible structural damage can occur to the pancreas in this condition. So, what is the etiology? Common is cholelithiasis. 90% is the gallstone. Then cholangitis, that is inflammation of bile ducts, and heavy alcohol use. A rare condition, the rare etiological factor can be pancreatic surgical, metabolic, hypercalcemia, hypertriglyceridemia. Then drug can be thiazide, azathioprine, sodium valproate. Mumps infection can cause pancreatitis, trauma or severe injury to abdominal area, organ transplantation, genetic factor, any family history can cause also pancreatitis. What is the pathophysiology? Surgical trauma, tumor, head of pancreas, autoimmune process, sphincter of Oddi dysfunction that can lead to obstruction to secretory pancreatic duct, and alcoholism also causes obstruction to secretory pancreatic duct and gallstone also. So these all three causes can lead to pancreatitis. So the what is after this obstruction to secretory pancreatic duct that leads to premature activation of enzymes in the pancreas and release of trypsin. Then that leads to inactivation of autodigestion of pancreatic cell. Then release of chymotrypsin and elastase phospholipase cause to destruction of blood vessels in the pancreas, which leads to destruction of blood wall of the blood vessels. Then release of inflammatory marker into the systemic circulation occurs due to the destruction of wall of the blood vessels. Then that can lead to multi-organ dysfunction and can lead to also severe hemorrhagic shock. Pathophysiology due to bile duct obstruction, that gallstones enters the common bile duct and lodges at the ampullator, obstructing the flow of pancreatic juice, that causing reflex of bile from the common bile duct into pancreatic duct, thus activating the powerful enzyme within the pancreas, which leads to activation of enzymes can leads to the vasodilation, increased vascular permeability, erosion, necrosis, and hemorrhage. So, what are the clinical manifestation of pancreatitis? There will be severe abdominal pain, tenderness, and back pain will be there. Pain is frequently acute in onset, occurring 24 to 48 hours after a heavy meal or alcohol ingestion. So, after that, the patient will complain of heavy pain. Then, nausea and vomiting will be there, fever. There will be fever and abdominal distension, cold, clammy skin, in addition to hypotension. So, how this acute pancreatitis affects the body, and the patient may complain of jaundice, rapid pulse, bloating, pain radiating in back, then clay caudalous stool will be there, nausea and vomiting, upper abdominal pain, coughs may be a complaint of the patient, then fever will be the complaint. Hypotension is a typical and reflects hypovolemia and shock. Discoloration of abdominal wall, typically ecchymosis in the flank or around umbilicus. Constipation is a common feature. Jaundice, steatorrhea, abdominal bloating, dyspnea, fatigue, and weakness. So, what are the diagnoses? First of all, you collect the history of the patient.
Ma'am,
Then, yes,
Kulin sign is also a clinical manifestation of
yeah,
pancreatitis.
pancreatitis, yes. Then physical examination, check the vital signs, temperature, pulse, BP, respiratory rate, check the cyanosis, pallor, and dyspnea. Tachypnea will be there. Class was, yeah.
Ma'am,
Oh, oh, oh. Ah, ah,
ma'am,
ah.
can you please explain the what is a Cullen sign?
I'll explain Kulansen.
Okay,
Just
ma'am.
wait for a minute.
Okay, ma'am. Sure.
So, where we are physical examination. So, as you said, Quillen sign is a bluish discoloration. That is a kind of ecchymosis, as I said. It can be seen around the umbilicus. This indicates that retroperitoneal bleeding is occurring. Okay. So,
Okay.
vital signs, temperature, pulse, BP, respiratory rate also you can check. Then cyanosis, as I said, pallor, check for dyspnea, tachypnea. Then intercostal retractions, wheezing and crackles may be present as the fluid begins to leak into the alveolar interstitial space. Then tachycardia or bradycardia or heart auscultation you will find. So what are the lab tests you will do? CBC, serum bilirubin, serum amylase and lipase, serum calcium, then liver function test, kidney function test, GTT, lactic acid dehydrogenase, then all imaging tests like CT scan, MRI, X-ray, other important procedures like ERCP, sorry, and that is endoscopic retrograde pancreatography, then MRCP, magnetic resonance cholangiopancreatography. Also, you have to do. So, as she said, Cullen sign is a very, common indicator for pancreatitis. Remember,
Yes,
uh,
ma'am.
yeah. As you assess the appendicitis in the backbone is formed, if you'll get a
Yes,
pain,
ma'am.
complaints of pain, that is a indicator for appendicitis. Similarly, Cullen sign is a common indicator for pancreatitis to diagnose immediately. Okay, so this is ERCP and MRCP as we discussed. So how will manage the medical management, pharmacological therapy? You will give analgesic like NSAIDs, opiate, tramadol you can give for chronic pain. You can give amitriptyline. Then antibiotic can be given. Impipenem, that is 500 milligram TID, IV. Then or meropenem 1 gram TID can be given. Then ciprofloxacin 400 milligram BD IV. You start. I'll join later. Okay. Ciprofloxacin 400 milligram BD IV will be given. Then piperacillin tazobactam 4.5 milligram TDS you will give. Antiemetic like ondansetron and sucralfate. These two you can give administered when the patient is complaining of vomiting. Then fluid resuscitation. Patients with severe pancreatitis require large volume of fluid to maintain adequate urine output and blood pressure. Nutritional support. Patients with severe pancreatitis who is unable to resume normal oral diets within 72 hours require nutritional support. So this is best delivered by an enteral rather than parenteral route. Then
Ma'am,
correct. Ah,
ma'am, what is a Great Turner sign?
great.
Great Turner sign.
Great Turner sign.
Yes, ma'am.
This is in pancreatitis.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think I have left that one. Great Turner sign.
Maybe this is something bluish discoloration,
That is not bluish discoloration, bruising. Bruising,
bruishing.
bruising discoloration means I think like ecchymosis. It is not
Okay.
bluish discoloration.
Yes, ma'am.
Ecchymosis, you might have seen somebody had give a punch to you. The bluish
Okay.
discoloration, what you see in ecchymosis, you might have seen in head injury cases, the lower eye, below to that the skin will be, or around the eye you can see in the ecchymosis in the skin. So that is the bruising, not bluish discoloration. I think that is bruising discoloration.
This is also indicated retroperitoneal bleeding.
Yeah, it is a indicator for retroperitoneal bleeding also. Okay. So
Okay,
both
ma'am.
the
Thank you, ma'am.
bluish discoloration you will say, Cullen sign you will see around the focus, but this gray tunnel sign you will see the bruising discoloration similar like ecchymosis, that you can find around the region. Okay, not around the umbilicus. So that is,
Side, maybe side of abdomen.
yeah, side of abdomen, the pancreas where it is situated. Okay, I
Okay,
mean
ma'am.
that is the hypochondriac region that you
Okay,
will.
ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Then correction of hypovolemia using normal saline and colloids, already you have discussed. Then medical management, vitals should be checked properly. Then maintain the volume status, electrolyte balance and nutritional status. You have to check. Then treat the complications like pancreatic abscess if it is there, infection or necrosis. Give oral rehydration solution, and to keep hydrated and to maintain the electrolyte balance. Then focused on supportive care. Then decrease stimulation of pancreas, avoidance of alcohol. Tell the patient to remain abstain from the alcohol taking. Then keep patients in NPO. Maybe surgical intervention is required. So if surgical management, surgical intervention required, the patient may undergo laparotomy. Laparotomy, all of you know, surgical procedure involving small incision through the abdominal wall to gain access into the abdominal cavity. It is also known as a ciliotomy. Pancreatic jejunostomy. The Pew-Stowe procedure is a surgical technique used to in the treatment of chronic pancreatitis. It involves side anastomosis of pancreatic duct and the jejunum. So this is a typical features of pancreatic jejunostomy. So the dead part, I mean the necrose part of the pancreas is discarded, removed, and that will be anastomes with the jejunum. Then subtotal pancreatomy can be also done. It is the surgical removal of all or part of the pancreas. Then cholecystectomy, it is the surgical removal of the gallbladder. Coming to the nursing management, as you said, history, often the history of gallbladder disease or alcohol is use or any precipitating factor, what we discussed, etiological factor. Then assess the GI distress, including diarrhea and passage of the stool. Assess the characteristics of abnormal stool and blood. It is an important assessment for nutritional and uh, fluid status. Then assess for the any kind of stone present in the gallbladder, and assess for the alcohol use. Assess the respiratory rate and pattern and breath sounds. Assess purplish discoloration in the flanks, that is Turner sign, as we have already discussed. That is bluish color. See, Cullen sign is bluish color around the umbilicus, periumbilical area. I mean, around the umbilicus you will see. But Turner sign, it is given that same like ecchymosis, as I said. You may get like bruising or discoloration in the flanks. You will get. So that is it has been given the purplish discoloration. Purplish discoloration, many of you might have seen in the raccoon size, as if you are seeing in the head injury cases around the eye.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. That
Yes,
kind
ma'am.
of discoloration you will see in the flank, that is called Turner sign. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So, nursing diagnosis, acute pain related to inflammation, edema, distension of the pancreas, and peritoneal irritation as evident by patients complaining about pain. So, for pain, you have to give the comfortable position to the patient. Your intervention will be assess the pain, how the type of quality of pain, and how much. At what duration the pain the patient is complaining. So all that you have to assess, then give the medications as per the doctor's order. Keep the patient NPO because patient may require further management. Then next is ineffective breathing pattern related to severe pain, pulmonary infiltrates, and pleural effusion as evident by dyspnea. So immediately you have to administer oxygen, assess the respiratory condition. Respiratory rate, all the characteristics of respiration. Then imbalanced nutrition less than body requirement related to reduced food intake and increased metabolic demands as evident by weight loss. So you have to keep the patient under NPO and administer the IV fluid. Then risk for both colored and crystalloid you have to give here. Risk for deficient fluid volume related to hypovolemia or shock secondary and nasogastric tube drainage or hemorrhage. So here you have to go for again the fluid administration and check for the intake output because the patient is in risk for deficient fluid volume deficit. I have already told you what intervention you will do for this type of nursing diagnosis. If the patient is potential, not actually happened fluid volume deficit, you have to do the intervention, check the intake output, see the features of observe for the features of dehydration, then administer the fluid, control the fluid with the drop rate, and take the weight of the patient. Then you will know that whether the fluid is adequate or not. Then although here the diagnosis it is given. So patient what to monitor the pain, I just say you every 2 hours patient use just measure the pain assessment you will do with the scale, visual analog scale. Then assess the patient position, give comfort high pillars position, leaning forward slightly, that may give relief to the patient. So all these alternative pain control measures like guided imagery or relaxation technique you may teach to the patient. Administer analgesic as prescribed. Administer the evaluation can be patient may feel better or less frequent episodes of pain. Similarly, for breathing pattern, you have to assess the respiratory rate and depth, then note the respiratory effort. If the patient is complaining of dyspnea, then give upright position, slightly forward leaning position that will give relief, and also the patient will dyspnea will be subsided. Then administer oxygen. Then encourage the patient to have cupping breathing exercise, deep cupping breathing exercise, and encourage the patient to turn the position every 2 hourly. Provide a restful environment. Well, then you engage the patient for diversional activities. So this intervention, the outcome can be uh, normal respiratory rate and pattern the patient may be established. Then imbalance nutrition less than body requirement in that diagnosis. We'll see the intervention, assess the nutritional status and increase metabolic requirement, and weight the patient every other day, checking serum albumin level on laboratory studies, administer intravenous fluids such as crystalloid electrolytes such as calcium and magnesium to replace losses, or colored solution if the patient experiences hypovolemic shock. Then encourage patients for bed rest to decrease the basal metabolic rate. Then encourage the patient to eat small and frequent meals. Provide soft light food that is easy to eat and digest. Once the oral food and fluid are allowed, the patient is placed in a bland diet. So low fat diet, high carbohydrate and high protein diet will be given. Outcome can be the patient nutritional status and weight will increase. Then risk for deficient fluid volume deficit, as I said, it is related to hypovolemia or shock. Uh, so the intervention will be assess the fluid and electrolyte status, that is the features of dehydration, skin turgor, mucous membrane, urine output, vital sign, hemodynamic parameters like urea creatinine and serum urea and creatinine. Then assess sources of fluid and electrolyte loss like vomiting, diarrhea, nasogastric drainage and excessive diaphoresis. Then administer intravenous fluids such as crystalloids like Ringer's lactate, electrolytes such as calcium and magnesium to replace losses, or colloid solutions if the patient experiences hypovolemic shock. Then maintain intake output chart. As I said, always for fluid volume deficit, when the patient is, you are writing a risk for fluid volume deficit, you have to maintain the intake output chart. Urine output is monitored hourly to measure the volume status. So when it is uh, 30 ml, less than 30 ml per hour, we say the condition is oliguria. Then administer blood or blood products if the patient has massive blood loss from hemorrhage. Then monitor the color, consistency, and amount of GI drainage from the nasogastric or gastrotomy tubes carefully. Conclusion for this pancreatitis: approximately half of deaths in acute pancreatitis occur within the first 14 days owing to organ failure, and the remainder of deaths occur later because of complications associated with necrotizing pancreatitis. So, improvement in mortality in the future and late complications of necrotizing pancreatitis and adequate nutritional support is crucial in patients with severe and complicated pancreatitis. New approaches to fluid resuscitation, antibiotic use, nutritional support, and treatment of necrosis have changed management, but not, widely it has not been used yet. Then we will go for hepatic encephalopathy. So, what is hepatic encephalopathy? It is a neuropsychiatric syndrome caused by liver disease. It's a life-threatening complication of liver disease, occurs with profound liver failure, and may result from the accumulation of ammonia and other toxic metabolites in the blood. As it progresses, confusion is followed by coma. Approximately 35% of all patients with cirrhosis of the liver die in hepatic coma. So, what is the etiology? Decrease in hepatocellular function, hypoxia, infection, diuretics like produce hypokalemia, alkalosis, and hypovolemia. Then depressions like use of phenobarbital, narcotics, tranquilizers, and sedatives, gastrointestinal bleeding, medications containing ammonium or amino compounds, then increased protein intake, constipation, dehydration, etc. Pathophysiology: the specific cause of hepatic encephalopathy is unknown, but characterized by elevation of ammonia level in the blood and cerebrospinal fluid. Ammonia is produced in GI tract when protein is break down by bacteria, by liver, and in lesser amount by gastric juices and peripheral tissue metabolism. So, what happens in hepatic encephalopathy? How it occurs? What is the pathophysiology? So, due to etiological and risk factor in liver, fail to convert ammonia into glutamine, which must stored in liver and then converted to urea and excreted through the kidney. Failure of the liver to this function due to liver cell damage and necrosis, blood ammonia level is rise. Due to rise in ammonia, many unusual compounds begin to form. Some of these compounds, like octopamine, apparently act as a false neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. Ammonia acts as a toxin for CNS, which affecting glial and nerve cells. That leads to altered CNS metabolism and function, which leads to any process that increase protein in the intestine, such as increased dietary protein or GI bleeding, causes elevated blood ammonia levels that leads to hepatocellular failure. So, what will be the clinical manifestation in case of hepatic encephalopathy? Change of intellect, personality, emotion, and consciousness with or without neurological sign. The degree of encephalopathy can be graded from 1 to 4. Grade 1, that is poor concentration will be there, slurred speech, disordered sleep rhythm. Grade 2, drowsy but easily rousable, occasional aggressive behavior, lethargic. Grade 3 will be marked confusion, drowsy, sleepy, but response to pain and voice, gross disorientation will be there. Grade 4, completely coma, unresponsive to voice, may or may not respond to painful stimuli also, completely unconscious. So earliest features are very mild and easily overlooked, but as the condition becomes more severe, apathy, inability to concentrate, confusion, disorientation, drowsiness, slurring of speech, and eventually coma develop. Convulsions sometimes also occur. What are the stages of hepatic encephalopathy? Stage 1, fatigue will be there, restlessness, irritability, decreased intellectual performance, decreased attention span, diminished short term memory, personality change, sleep pattern reversal. Stage 2, deterioration in handwriting, asterixis, that is flapping tremor, jerky movement of hand, specially present. Then drowsiness, confusion, uh, then lethargy, pruritus, then fetor hepaticus, that is ordered due to presence of circulating methionine. Stage 3, there will be severe confusion, inability to follow commands, deep somnolence, but rousable, patient is rousable. But stage 4, that is kind of delirium type in stage 3. Stage 4, completely coma, unresponsive to painful stimuli, possibly decorticate and decerebrate posturing. That is more of Glasgow coma scale. If you will see, it's a severe condition of GCS score maybe 8, 9, 7, like that. Diagnostic evaluation will be history collection, physical examination, flapping tremor, inability to perform simple mental arithmetic tasks or draw objects such as star. Arterial ammonia is usually increased. As condition progress, hyperreflexia, bilateral extensor plantar responses, sweet and fruity smell from breath, then EEG will found, generalized flowing and increase in amplitude of brain waves and characteristics. There will be changes in the brain waves characteristics. So, what are the management of hepatic HE or hepatic encephalopathy? The principles of management for hepatic encephalopathy are to treat or remove the causative factor and to suppress the production of neurotoxins by bacteria in the bowel. That means how will immediately remove the ammonia from the bowel and not to give the body to accumulate ammonium. So medical management is lactulose 15 to 30 ml 8 hourly, will be given. That is, lactulose is a disaccharide which is taken orally and reaches the colon intact to be metabolized by colonic bacteria. The dose is increased slowly until bowel is moving twice daily. It produces an osmotic laxative effects, reduces pH of the colonic content, thereby limiting colonic ammonia absorption and promotes the incorporation of nitrogen into bacteria. Then neomycin 1 to 4 gram 4 to 6 hourly is an antibiotic which acts by reducing the bacterial content of the bowel. It can be used in addition or as an alternative to lactulose intolerance. Dietary protein restriction is rarely needed and is no longer recommended as first line treatment because it is unpalatable and can lead to worsening nutritional state in already malnourished patient. So you have to give dietary protein. Then surgical management, liver transplantation is the only indication for chronic or refractory hepatic encephalopathy. Nursing management, history taking, physical examination, assess for changes of intellect, personality, emotions and consciousness, assess for severe apathy, inability to concentrate, confusion and disorientation, drowsiness, slurring of speech and coma, bilateral extensor plantar response will be there. That means if you'll see the plantar flexion, I mean plantar usually flexion you will get, but in this case that is called Brzezinski sign. You will get a extension, plantar extension, so you will suspect for hepatic encephalopathy. Then paraplegia dementia, assess the result of ABG and electrolyte level.
Ma'am, what is a
Yes.
paraplegia dementia?
Dementia means progressive
Lo-
memory loss.
yes, ma'am.
Paraplegia means the lower limb will be paralyzed.
Sorry, ma'am.
Lower limbs
Lower limb. Okay, ma'am.
will be paralyzed. Okay. So as I said, ki encephalopathy, there will be a gross motor, upper motor neuron involvement will be there. That will reduce the function of glial cells, etc. So that will cause upper motor neuron involvement of upper motor neuron level, and that will show the plantar extension. Usually, normally we have plantar flexion. It will check the Brzezinski sign, but in that condition, you will get plantar extension. I think you might have seen the doctors, they used to uh, check the plantar flexion or extension in case of when the upper motor neuron is involvement there is there. That means in CNS involvement. Okay, so they may use a key or anything to elicit the reflexes. Okay, so what are the nursing diagnosis? First of all, deficient fluid volume related to bleeding, decrease intake and ascites as evidenced by physical examination, ineffective breathing pattern related to hypoxia, imbalanced nutrition less than body requirement related to GI adverse effect, risk for injury related to loss of protective mechanism secondary to hepatic coma. So I just give one point here I want to highlight. All of you when writing assignments, uh, when you writing nursing management of any disease condition, those students who are writing in the format of nursing diagnosis and intervention, they will get weightage of mark. So always when you are writing nursing management, you write in the nursing process format. What assessment you will do, and what diagnosis, nursing diagnosis will be there for disease condition, and what intervention. You just write the diagnosis and intervention. That is also you will get good marks in that. Okay. So other nursing diagnosis can be active intolerance, then there will be self-care deficit, then disturbed sleep pattern will be there, impaired verbal communication will be there due to CNS involvement, then risk for aspiration, impaired gas exchange will be there due to unconsciousness, impaired tissue integrity will be there due to coma's condition or unconsciousness, disturb sensory perception will be there. So what are the intervention you will do? Fluid balance must be balanced and should start intravenous therapy, maintained and monitored to prevent further hepatic injury and reduce renal perfusion, monitor vital signs frequently, measure urine output hourly, monitor electrolyte and acid base balance because its disturbances such as hypokalemia and alkalosis may precipitate hepatic encephalopathy. Hepatic coma may create a multitude of problems for the client with encephalopathy. Prevent hypoxemia by giving, administering oxygen. To prevent and treat hypoxemia, attend to respiratory intervention like administering oxygen, then changing the position to the upright condition. See the patient condition accordingly. You will act. Then prevent nosocomial infection because the patient is vulnerable to get infection and patient is having a low immunity for the hepatic failure and hepatic encephalopathy due to any this liver cell damage. And prevent ammonia toxicity and hypokalemia, prevention to the injuries, skin injuries, skin integrity. If the patient is unconscious, what you will do? Always attend the patient when the giving patient is giving a call. When you are leaving the patient, also raise the side rails. Then to prevent the skin injury or maintain the skin integrity, you have to use the stockings so that the patient won't develop thrombosis, etc. Then coming to the hepatic failure. So hepatic failure, the as you know, the functions of liver can be regulation of glucose, cholesterol, purification, transformation, and clearance of toxins. That is main function. Storage of glucose, fat soluble vitamins, folic acid, vitamin B12, copper, iron, etc. Then metabolism of carbohydrate, fat, and protein, synthesis and secretion of clotting factors, transporter of protein, cholesterol, bile for digestion, glucose, etc. So there are multiple functions that when the liver is healthy, you will be healthy. You will look more young if liver is healthy. Liver failure is an uncommon condition in which rapid deterioration of liver function results in coagulopathy and alteration in the mental status. Encephalopathy will be there. Then liver failure indicates that liver has some kind of sustained injury, that is damage to the liver cells. So it's a severe deterioration of liver function. Hepatic failure, when we are talking about, here a large portion of liver is damaged beyond repair due to any type of liver disorder. It is a life-threatening condition and require immediate medical care. So types of liver failure can be fulminant hepatic failure, then acute liver failure, then late onset hepatic failure, chronic decompensated hepatic failure. So, in case of fulminant hepatic failure, encephalopathy starts within 8 weeks. In acute liver failure, it's a rare condition characterized by the abrupt onset of severe liver injury. Then, late onset of hepatic failure, that subacute hepatic failure will be there. Then, chronic decompensated hepatic failure over 6 months or later period. Beyond 6 months, it is called chronic decompensated hepatic failure. Decompensated means irreversible liver damage will be there. Causes and risk factor: large part of liver damage beyond repair and liver no longer able to work. It's because of hepatitis B C infection, long-term alcohol consumption, cirrhosis of liver, severe malnutrition, acetaminophen intoxication, ingestion of poison. Then in case of hepatocellular carcinoma. So this is what the different stages of liver failure has in healthy liver inflammation, that is also known as fatty liver, increased liver due to fat deposits. Fatty liver doesn't occur with the alcohol consumption only. That is also occur in case of obesity, sedentary lifestyle, also all that. Then faulty fooding, everything is responsible for that also. Then fibrosis can lead to cirrhosis, and cirrhosis liver can lead to liver cancer, and liver cancer can lead to liver end stage liver disease, that ESLD, or you can say hepatic failure. Mechanisms of hepatic injury or liver cell damage: immune mediated hepatocellular injury due to viral infections or drug hepatotoxicity. Then some drugs are responsible for causing hepatic damage, hepatocellular damage. That is, so for example, dihydrolysin. Then the direct hepatocellular injury may be due to hepatotropic virus family, then toxic or reactive metabolites, metabolites of compound. Then ischemic hepatocellular injuries also will be there. So the effect will be impaired hepatocytes regeneration. There will be no, regeneration of hepatocellular cells of liver. Then altered, that leads to altered parenchymal perfusion. That will lead to endotoxemia. That leads to decreased hepatic reticuloendothelial function, which finally leads to hepatic failure. So pathophysiology in that hepatic failure can lead to cerebral edema, and multi-system organ failure will occur subsequently. So as we learned the encephalopathy, uh, initially will be encephalopathy will occur, and gradually due to this cerebral edema and also deposition of ammonia, that will be there. Then finally the failure will be there, hepatic failure. So these are all manifestation of acute liver failure. You can see hepatic encephalopathy, brain edema, intercellular hypertension. All these are pictures you can initially get of hepatic failure. Then that will leads to multi-organ failure. It can affect to the intestine, to the heart, to the kidney. Finally, the toxins which cannot be metabolized by the liver, it will affect to the kidney also. It will affect to the heart also. Then obviously the CNS we learned. Then and also it will there will be immunoparesis, paresis, that all neutrophil dysfunction will be there, and systemic inflammatory response will be there. The whole body inflammation will be there. All vital organs will be inflamed. So, clinical manifestation in hepatic failure, early symptoms will be nausea, loss of appetite, fatigue, diarrhea, urgent treatment for jaundice, bleeding, easily swollen abdomen, mental disorientation or confusion that will lead to hepatic encephalopathy, then sleepiness and coma. Blood test diagnostic evaluation can be done. Blood test, liver tissue biopsy, Doppler ultrasound, CT scan, MRI, electroencephalography. So, what are the supportive care you will give for hepatic failure? You will give a quiet environment. ICU will monitor the hemodynamics and ventilator support to be given. Avoid sedation and stimulation. Fluid restriction will be there, 60 to 80% of daily requirement. Then choice of fluid, usually 0.25% sodium chloride and 10% dextrose. Prevention of hypoglycemia. Maintain glucose level by giving 10% dextrose. Then you will give IV H2 blockers to avoid the bleedings and all. Then antibiotics, cefuroximine, amoxicillin, fluconazole or ceftriaxone, cefotaxime and flucloxacillin you will give. Then anemia should be corrected to ensure maximum oxygen supply to tissue. Lactulose to be given, which can be metabolized to organic acid by colonic bacteria and reduces the ammonia production by bacteria and traps ammonia in acidic intestinal contents, avoid diarrhea. Then IV and acetylcysteine benefits patients after paracetamol overdose, even with encephalopathy and coagulopathy. Then early intubation, as soon as gag reflex lost or patient develops grade 3 or 4 encephalopathy. That is almost hepatic, leading to hepatic failure. Then IV midazolam as propofol can be used for intubated patients who require sedation. Sedatives should not be used in patients who are not intubated. Immunosuppressive, that is steroids may help in autoimmune hepatitis. Antivirals will be given. Consider plasma exchange in Wilson's disease. Then aminatophthalates poisoning, in that case do the gastric lavage. High dose penicillin will be given. Then in case of both cherry, transjugular intrahepatic portocabal salt and anticoagulation can be given if it is required. Then management of complications will be done. So it requires a close monitoring. Continuous oxygen saturation will be seen. Then clinical status, you will monitor with pulse BP. Then liver size 12 hourly. Then strictly monitor intake output chart, avoid fluid overload. Then central venous pressure, you have to monitor Foley's and atrial line. You have to check mean atrial pressure. You will see it should not cross more than 60 mm of Hg. Frequent evaluation of blood glucose and neurological status. 12 hourly electrolyte and coagulation studies will be done. Plasmapheresis, a blood purification procedure, high volume plasmapheresis associated with rise in conscious level, hemodynamics and reduction in arterial ammonia concentration. And disadvantage is that possible hepatic growth factors are removed along with hepatotoxic mediators. So we'll go for management. Just wait for 5 minutes.
got up when class is going on.
Hello, please give me 5 minutes time. I'm coming. Coming back to class.
About this assignment, where you all are posting, can you type address and give us?
Hello, madam. Excuse me. Um, I have a doubt, ma'am. Message button.
Hello. Sorry to make you sit for a long time because I had some problem. So I went to see that emergency. One student had some problem.
It's okay.
Thank you for waiting. So we'll start with the. We'll continue in the class. Now the PPT is visible to all of you.
Yes.
So, management in acute liver failure, medications to reverse the poisoning, I mean the toxins which is deposited, liver failure caused by acetaminophen overdose. Sometimes it is caused by mushroom poisoning, which can be treated with drugs and that can reverse the effect of the toxin. So, antidotes like penicillin G, activated charcoal, then N-acetylcysteine neutralize toxic agents and neutralize or counteract any form of poisoning. These are universal antidote. Or you can give activated charcoal for that. Hemodialysis can be used to remove the toxins from the body. Then excess fluid in the brain can be relieved. The cerebral edema caused by liver failure can increase the pressure on brain. So osmotic diuretics, that is mannitol, can be given to reduce the fluid overload in the brain. Administration of intravenous mannitol will be given in a dose of 0.5 to 1 kg, 1 gram per kg. That is or 50 to 100 gram is recommended to treat cerebral edema in liver failure. No. Next is screening for infections. Periodic samples of blood and urine to be tested for signs of infection. If suspect an infection, patient receives antibiotics medication to be given to treat the infection. If patient lost lots of blood, then blood transfusion should be given. So it's a kind of all the as per the disease condition, the symptomatic treatment you have to give. Surgical management. Finally, liver transplant is the or choice of treatment. So replace damaged liver with healthy liver. Then common complication can be encephalopathy in case of acute liver failure, cerebral edema, raised intracranial pressure, infection, coagulopathy will be there, hypoglycemia, dyslipidemia, acid-base disturbance, multi-organ failure will be there. So next we will go for chest trauma. In this condition, I think all the teachers, they have covered maximum disease condition. We'll have another 2 class for research orientation, because that is also needed for your self activity and supervised activity you have to submit. So we'll have research class on 7th and 8th. Both the days will take research or some other topic which is not relevant to the disease condition. So chest injury or chest trauma will in that, as you know, chest is large exposed portion of the body, and that is vulnerable to impact injury because of all the vital organs are there sealed by with the chest house. Injuries to thoracic cage and its content can restrict the heart's ability to pump blood or lungs' ability to exchange air and oxygenated blood. Most danger with chest injury is internal bleeding and organ puncture. So this is what the clinical anatomy you will go through. Uh, you will go through in the book. So what is chest injury? Chest injury is any form of physical injury to the chest, including the ribs, heart and lungs. Major chest injuries may occur alone or multiple other injuries. So epidemiology, the number of accidental deaths in India is even higher than in the Western world because of thoracic trauma contributes heavily to these figures besides the head injury, abdominal injury and orthopedic injuries. Approximately 1/4 of civilian trauma deaths are caused by thoracic trauma. So what are the causes of chest injuries? It can be penetrating injuries or blunt trauma. Blunt trauma you can see in motor vehicle accident or auto versus penetration or falls or blast injuries. Then penetrating trauma can be gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or and then shrapnel wounds. Rib fracture. A rib fracture is a break in rib bone. Rib fractures occur when significant enough force directed at the rib causes a break. Any rib fracture should warrant a thorough evaluation of any concomitant injury, including lungs, heart, kidneys, spleen, liver, and neurovasculature. Ribs 1 through 3 are the hardest to break, and significantly a significant degree of trauma, if fractured, from rib 4 to through 10 are typically the most vulnerable, while ribs 11 through are more vulnerable. So causes of rib cartilage injury due to sports injury, work injury, automobile accident, domestic fall, assault or bodily injury, forceful coughing. So what are the signs, symptoms? Tenderness on palpation, chest wall deformity will be there, paradoxical abnormal chest movement will be there, ventilatory insufficiency that shows, that will be elicited by tachycardia and cyanosis, anxiety and distress will be there. Management, for simple isolated rib fractures, conservative therapy is usually adequate, which includes appropriate analgesia, rest, and ice. The use of an incentive spirometer should be encouraged to prevent pulmonary atelectasis and splinting. Intercostal nerve blocks can also be applied to aid in pain control. When conservative management fails or for more severe rib fractures, surgical stabilization can be an option. So what are the nursing management? The nurse instructs the patient to use an incentive spirometer every hour, provide rest and avoid strenuous activities for several days, assess the respiratory pattern every hour for several days. Then flail chest. What is flail chest? Any idea? So flail chest is a life-threatening medical condition that occurs when segment of the rib cage breaks due to trauma and become detached from the rest of the chest wall. Flail chest is a thoracic injury resulting in paradoxical motion of the chest wall segment. Flail chest is a traumatic condition of the thorax. It may occur when 3 or more ribs are broken in at least 2 places. A flail chest arises when these injuries cause a segment of the chest wall to move independently of the rest of the chest wall. Flail chest can create a significant disturbance to respiratory physiology. The disturbance in respiratory function is important in patients who are older and who have chronic lung disease. So, in those cases, it will be severe. Flail chest is an important injury with significant complications. So, this is a cause for the flail chest, vehicle accident mostly, then falls in elderly population, especially, and then because of their weakness and fragile bones. Third most common cause is the blunt trauma in children, especially those with genetic condition like osteogenesis imperfecta. Pathophysiology of flail chest. A flail segment of the chest wall will negatively affect respiration in 3 ways: ineffective ventilation, pulmonary contusion, and hypoventilation with atelectasis. See, this is a pictorial presentation how the flail inspiration and expiration occurs. See the normal inspiration and normal expiration. Then flail inspiration is reverse of that normal mechanism. Flail chest, the sign symptoms can be painful breathing, paradoxical chest movement, rapid shallow respiration will be there, dyspnea will be there, tachypnea will be there, and tachycardia will be there. Then you may find the bruising in that area where the trauma, I mean the punch or something has occurred. Then there will be crepitus, grinding of bone ends and palpation. Then hypoventilation sign you will find. Then I will diagnose clinical examination for bruises. Then to, see the chest wall movement in your respiration while assessing the respiratory status. You will see the paradoxical movement of flail segment. Then send the patient for a chest X-ray. You will reach in a concluding diagnosis. Then you do the CT scan also. Management for flail chest: analgesia will be given, intubation and ventilation, chest tube insertion, then rib fracture fixation. Flail chest management you will do by giving analgesia as a mainstay, then opioid analgesics will give, then non-steroid steroid anti-inflammatory drugs you will give, then thoracic or hair lumbar epidurals with or without opioid additives you will give, then posterior rib blocks may be given, instillation of LA into pleural space will be given. Intubation and ventilation rarely indicated in case of hypoxia due to pulmonary contusion. In that case, you will go for that. So, you will use your double lumen tracheal tube. Each lumen will be connected to a different ventilator when intubation takes place. Each lung may require drastically different pressures and flows to adequately ventilate. Then see this is the chest tube, how it is inserted. Nursing management: frequent and prompt respiratory assessment, adequate oxygen will be given, analgesia to improve ventilation, clear the secretions, stabilize the thoracic cage, deep breathing exercise you have to teach. Then intubation and mechanical ventilation may be required to prevent further hypoxia. So next is pneumothorax. Pneumothorax is an abnormal collection of air in the pleural space between the lung and the chest wall. Pneumothorax is defined as a collection of air outside the lung but within the pleural cavity. It occurs when air accumulates between the parietal and visceral pleura inside the chest. The air accumulation can apply pressure on the lungs and make it collapse. The degree of collapse determines the clinical presentation of pneumothorax. See the pictorial presentation, how the pressure is given and the lungs has been collapsed. So what are the types of pneumothorax? Spontaneous pneumothorax or closed pneumothorax, then iatrogenic pneumothorax or open pneumothorax, then tension pneumothorax. Spontaneous pneumothorax, it is acquired in the absence of trauma. A primary spontaneous pneumothorax is found in patients without underlying pulmonary pathology. A secondary spontaneous pneumothorax is found in patients with underlying lung disease, that is in case of COPD or asthma, etc. Iatrogenic pneumothorax, this is a type of pneumothorax that occurs due to diagnostic or therapeutic interventions. Thoracocentesis, pleural biopsy, central line placement, mechanical ventilation, thoracoscopy, mediastinoscopy, and tracheostomy. In those cases, there may be traumatic pneumothorax can occur. So, in case of so in that case, you will go for thoracentesis, pacemaker insertion, bronchoscopy, CPR, lung biopsy, barotrauma. All these are causes for the iatrogenic pneumothorax also. So closed pneumothorax, open pneumothorax, tension pneumothorax. In closed pneumothorax, the pleural cavity pressure is less than the atmospheric pressure. Open pneumothorax, the pleural cavity pressure is equal to the atmospheric pressure, and in tension pneumothorax, the pleural cavity pressure is more than the atmospheric pressure. So categories can be small pneumothorax or large pneumothorax. Small pneumothorax, the presence of a visible rim or less than 2 cm between the lung margin and the chest wall, other pneumothorax will occur. But in large pneumothorax, there will be a visible rim. You can see more than the 2 cm between the lung margin and the chest wall. So this is the pathophysiology of pneumothorax. Due to mechanical injury or any sort of injury or iatrogenic injury, there will be spontaneous rupture of blebs and release, then that will lead to primary spontaneous pneumothorax. Then that will lead to congestion of the alveoli and there will be collapse of the lungs. Clinical pictures. In closed pneumothorax, there will be reduced chest expansion, hyperresonant note on percussion you will hear, reduced air entry, mediastinal shift to opposite side will be there, decreased tactile vocal trematose will be heard, then decreased vocal resonance will be heard. Open pneumothorax, crackpot sound on percussion you will find, amphoric breath sounds you will find, voice and cough sounds may be heard with metallic echo. Tension pneumothorax, displacement of the mediastinum with respiration you will find, dyspnea, cyanosis, tachycardia, increase RR, then decrease BP, respiratory failure will be there. Chest pain, as we were discussing, in case of severe sharp or stabbing, pleuritic or radius to ipsilateral shoulder arm, the pain will complain. Then shortness of breath will be there, anxiety and cough will be there. Then absent of breath sounds on the affected side will be there. Then diagnosis of pneumothorax. Pneumothorax usually diagnosed through a physical examination and chest X-ray. Tests that may be ordered include ABG gas analysis, other blood tests, chest X-ray, CT scan. If other injuries or conditions are suspected, then electrocardiogram. Management of the pneumothorax. Management is guided by the all etiological factor. As per the etiological factor, you have to take act accordingly, take the measures accordingly. Then clinical presentation and risk stratification. So principle of treatment of pneumothorax are how to remove the air, accumulated air. So air elimination, reduction of air leakage from the long alveoli, healing of pleural fistula, promoting re-expansion of the lungs, prevention of future recurrences. So you have to give a chest tube insertion, that is thoracostomy, and the flexible tube that can be inserted through the chest wall between the ribs into the pleural space. Thoracostomy tubes are commonly made up of PVC or silicone. The range that may range from 6 to 40 French gauge. The majority are fenestrated alongside the sides of the insertion. The tubes have radio opaque strips, transparent. A thoracostomy tube is usually placed between the mid to anterior axillary line in the fourth and fifth intercostal space, tracking above the rib so as not to injure the intercostal bundle, that is artery, vein and nerve. Maintain a closed chest drainage system. Be sure to tape all connections and secure the tube carefully and the insertion site with adhesive bandage so the extra air should not gauze into the pleural space. Outside air. So they regulate the suction according to the chest tube system direction. Generally, suction does not exceed 20 to 25 cm of water negative pressure. Then give water transfusion and antibiotics, oxygen therapy. Auto transfusion involves taking the patient's own blood that has been drained from the chest, filtering it, and then transfusing it back to the vascular system. Antibiotics are usually prescribed to combat infection from contamination. Then oxygen therapy will be given. So this is all about pneumothorax. I think all hemothorax, all that you can read from your book. And we are concluding the session now. And I'll be taking, me or Reenu madam, any one of us will be taking a research class on 7th and 8th. So hopefully we'll talk to the regional center and if possible, we'll inform you again the timing and when we'll meet again for the research class. Thank you all for your patient listening.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, dear colleagues. Any one of you can tell us where to send our assignments?